Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Can you imagine being forced to marry the man who destroyed your family? Thus began the life of Brittany, a princess who turned humiliation into power. Discover her incredible story, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss anything. Imagine, for a moment, an independent kingdom, a small universe of gray stone castles, surrounded by a raging sea and fertile lands. That was Brittany, a duchy with a rich history and a culture of its own, proudly different from the France that surrounded it. Its lords, the Dukes of Brittany, reigned with near absolute power, forging alliances, waging wars and jealously maintaining their sovereignty. Life in Brittany was a mixture of feudal grandeur and ancestral traditions, a melting pot of cultures reflected in its rich architecture and unique customs. Its own language, Breton, a Celtic language with ancient roots, echoed in the marketplaces and fields, a testament to its unique identity. This language, along with traditions and laws, contributed to the cohesion of a people who felt different, a people with a history going back centuries, to a mythical and legendary past. Brittany was, in essence, a nation within a nation, a political and cultural entity that resisted absorption by the powerful French kingdom. But this independence, this proud separation, was not without its dangers. The ambition of the kings of France constantly hovered over Brittany, like a latent threat. The much greater French military power was a reality that the Breton dukes had to always keep in mind. The fragile peace between the two kingdoms was maintained through strategic alliances, political marriages, and careful diplomacy, a delicate balance that could be broken at any moment. But before we talk about, and you have to meet her family, the Dukes of Brittany. Their history is as complex as a medieval tapestry, full of strategic alliances, palace betrayals, and, of course, wars. Imagine a lineage of proud rulers, clinging to their independence, fighting against the growing influence of great powers like France. Their lineage goes back centuries, a long chain of kings and queens that forged Brittany's unique identity. His father, Francis II, was a powerful duke but also a bit reckless. His political decisions, though sometimes bold, brought him into clashes with the kings of France, and his reign was marked by instability. He and his wife, Marguerite de Foix, tried to secure the future of Brittany through marriage alliances, but fate had other plans for their daughter, and the premature death of Francis II left Brittany in a vulnerable situation, and, still very young, inherited the duchy, becoming a key player in the European power game. Her young age and the ambition of the Breton nobles and the French kings made her a constantly threatened figure. The fate of Brittany, and that of Anne, depended on risky decisions and an inner strength that few could imagine. So, imagine a girl growing up in the castle of Vannes, surrounded by luxury, but also the constant threat of war and politics. Her childhood was not a fairy tale, but a complex web of intrigues and alliances, where every decision of her family could determine her future, and that of Brittany as a whole. From a very young age, she had to learn to move carefully in a world of adults playing a dangerous game, where love and friendship were as ephemeral as the beauty of a spring flower. Her father, Francis II, was a powerful duke but also a weak and vacillating man, immersed in power struggles. Her mother, Margaret de Foix, was a shrewd and ambitious woman, who tried to secure her daughter's future through strategic alliances, even if it meant sacrificing Anne's happiness. The little princess was aware of her precarious position, learning to read between the lines and understand the complexities of the Breton court, and was a fast learner. She observed the negotiations, the inheritance disputes, and the power games going on around her. Despite her young age, she understood that her value lay not only in her royal blood, but in her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of politics. Her childhood was a hard school, but it was also the forging of an exceptionally intelligent and determined woman. But this idyllic childhood was cut short. France, under the reign of Charles VIII, looked greedily at the Duchy of Brittany. You already know that Brittany was a rich and strategic territory, a key piece on the European chessboard. For Charles, annexing Brittany meant increasing his power and consolidating his position as king. It was not a question of simple territorial ambitions, but of pure political necessity. prosody s/speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. French ambition was no secret. Charles VIII, driven by advisors eager for expansion, saw Brittany as an easy prey. The civil wars ravaging the duchy had weakened its defenses, creating a perfect opportunity for conquest. To him, and was just another piece in his political game, a tool to secure Brittany's attachment to the French crown. The invasion was swift and brutal. The French armies, superior in numbers and weaponry, advanced without mercy. Anne's father, Francis II, tried to resist, but his efforts were in vain. The defeat was crushing, leaving Brittany at the mercy of French ambition. For Anne, this meant not only the loss of her home and her title, but also the humiliating necessity of negotiating her own survival and that of her family. So, imagine, French ambition loomed over Brittany. Charles VIII, a young and ambitious king, saw in your land an irresistible booty. The War of the Breton Succession broke out, a brutal conflict that directly involved you. It was a struggle for control of the duchy, a struggle for your future, for your freedom. Your uncle, Francis II, tried to defend Brittany with all his might, but the French military superiority was overwhelming. Battles ensued, leaving behind a trail of death and destruction. You, still a young princess, were a key piece on this war chessboard, a symbol of Breton resistance, but also a coveted target for the French. The conflict forced you to make crucial decisions, strategic alliances that would mark your destiny. You found yourself in a desperate situation, surrounded by betrayal and constant danger. The survival of Brittany and your own hung in the balance. In the midst of war, politics became as powerful a weapon as any sword. Rennes, the last Breton fortress, stood imposing, but the French threat was imminent. Imagine its stone walls, resisting the siege, while the army of Charles VIII surrounded it. You, watching from a window, saw the bustle in the streets, preparing for a desperate defense. Uncertainty loomed over you, a young princess caught in the middle of a war that was tearing your home apart. The sound of cannons boomed, shaking the foundations of the castle. Day by day, the siege intensified, and hope dwindled. The defenders, though brave, could not hold out forever. The lack of supplies and the numerical superiority of the French army were overwhelming. You, in the midst of the chaos, began to understand the stark reality of your situation. The fall of Rennes was inevitable. Finally, after weeks of fierce fighting, the ramparts gave way. The entrance to Rennes opened, allowing the French army to pass through. Remember the image. Soldiers entering the city, confusion and fear on the faces of the people. The end of Breton resistance in Rennes meant the loss of your land, the end of your independence, but also the beginning of a new era, one in which you would have to use your cunning and courage to navigate the complexities of the French court. Rennes fell. Breton resistance, however heroic, faded in the face of French might. And there you were, Anne, young princess, forced to marry Charles VIII, the king who had conquered your land, the man who had destroyed your family. Imagine the humiliation, the pent-up rage, the helplessness before the immensity of his victorious army. The wedding was a spectacle of power, a demonstration of French victory. You, surrounded by the opulence of the French court, a luxury that hid the bitterness of your situation. It was a political union, a strategy to consolidate the annexation of Brittany to France. For Charles VIII, it was a key piece in his political game board. For you, a forced marriage, a golden prison. But you were more than a piece in a game. You had a keen intelligence, a steely determination, and a vision that went beyond mere survival. You knew that marrying the king, albeit under the circumstances, gave you unexpected power. It was the first piece in a complex game you would play for years to come, a game where survival was the immediate goal, but ultimate victory something far greater. Your arrival at the French court was a culture shock. Imagine, from the castles of Brittany, with their traditions and family customs, to the opulence and rigidity of the court of Charles VIII. Everything was new, imposing, and at times downright intimidating. The palace intrigues, the rivalries between nobles, the inquisitive stares. It was a world that required you to learn quickly, adapt intelligently, and, above all, stand your ground. Prosody is speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Language, for example, was an initial obstacle. Although you had a knowledge of French court language with its formalisms and subtleties, was a minefield. Every word, every gesture could be interpreted in different ways, and a mistake could have major consequences. But you learned quickly, demonstrating a mental acuity that allowed you to navigate that sea of intrigue with surprising skill. Despite the latent hostility, you also found unexpected allies. Some ladies of the court, seeing in you an intelligent woman worthy of respect, approached you to offer their support. These alliances, forged with caution and discretion, proved crucial to your survival and, eventually, to your rise within the complex hierarchy of the French court. You learned to use your charm and intelligence to win the respect, and sometimes the admiration, of those who at first saw you as a mere cog in the political game. Suddenly, everything changed. The death of Charles VIII left you in an unexpected position. You were no longer just the wife of the conquering king, but a young and powerful widow, with the fate of Brittany in your hands. Mourning enveloped you, but in the silence of the royal chambers, you planned your next move. The French court, accustomed to instability, watched your decisions closely. The succession to the throne was at stake, and with it, the possibility of renegotiating your position. The French nobles, always greedy for power, were looking to you as an ally. You had to play your cards wisely, taking advantage of the vulnerability of the crown and the uncertainty of the future. Every conversation, every glance, became a key piece in your strategy. Louis XII, the new king, was a powerful and ambitious man. For him, marrying you was not just a political union, but a way to consolidate his power and ensure the loyalty of Brittany. But you were not just a piece in his game. You had learned from your mistakes and were now in a position of strength to negotiate the best possible terms for your duchy. Your widowhood, unexpected and sudden, placed you at the center of a complex political chess game. France needed a new king, and you, the heiress of Brittany, were a key player. Louis XII, cousin of Charles VIII and Duke of Orleans, emerged as the leading candidate for the throne. He had his own plans for Brittany, and they were not as benign as you might expect. Louis XII made no secret of his ambition for Brittany. For him, your hand was a tool to consolidate his power and ensure total control over the territory. His interest was not romantic, but purely strategic. He knew that marrying you would mean annexing Brittany to the French crown for good, putting an end to Breton resistance. But you, after your bitter experience with Charles VIII, were a skilled negotiator. You were not going to allow yourself to be treated as a mere bargaining chip again. You knew you had great courage and that you could use your position to get better terms for Brittany, even within the French kingdom. Your intelligence and your determination would be your weapons in this new battle. Louis XII, a widowed and ambitious king, needed you, not only to ensure the stability of his kingdom, but also to consolidate his power over Brittany, a rich and strategic duchy. This time, the negotiation was different. You were no longer a helpless child, but a dowager queen with a thorough knowledge of the French court and considerable political astuteness. You knew that your marriage to Louis was a necessity for both of you, a union of convenience, but you had the upper hand. This time, you dictated the terms. It was not just a marriage, but a treaty. In exchange for your hand, you demanded guarantees for Brittany, protecting its laws, customs, and cultural identity. You demanded privileges and autonomy for your duchy, ensuring that its wealth and independence would remain, at least in part, intact. You negotiated with the precision of a master chess player, each piece in its place. Your intelligence and your firmness surprised many. You had transformed a potentially disastrous situation into an opportunity to strengthen Brittany's position within France. The marriage to Louis XII was not a defeat, but a strategic victory. You had masterfully played the game of power, turning your apparent vulnerability into a source of strength and negotiation. So, you married Louis XII. Imagine the scene, you, and no longer a victim, but a key player on the European political chessboard. This time, the negotiation was different. You were not a bargaining chip, but a queen with real power, able to negotiate favorable terms for Britain. Your second marriage was not an imposition, but a strategic alliance, a marriage that gave you the opportunity to consolidate your influence at the French court. Prosody / speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Your political astuteness did not go unnoticed. You became a figure respected, even loved, by many at court, not only because of your beauty and the charm you possessed, but because of your intelligence and your ability to navigate the complexities of French politics. You used your position to protect Brittany's interests, even though full independence was already a distant dream. Despite the adversities and the betrayals you surely faced, your influence extended beyond the political realm. You sponsored the arts and culture, leaving an indelible mark on the French Renaissance. You became a symbol of resilience and determination, a woman who surpassed expectations and defied the norms of her time, proving that even in the heart of the French court, a Breton princess could shine with her own light. This time, the negotiation was different. You were not just a piece in a chess game, but the shrewdest player. With Louis XII, you got something crucial, the promise to keep the Breton identity, albeit within French borders. It was not just about land and titles, but about preserving the culture, the laws, the language, the very essence of Brittany. You made sure that Brittany was not simply absorbed by France. Your diplomatic skills allowed you to negotiate treaties that guaranteed certain autonomies, protecting the economic and political interests of your homeland. It was hard work, full of intrigues and strategic alliances, but your determination was unwavering. Your marriage to Louis XII was not just a political union, it was a tool. You used it to protect Brittany, to weave a network of alliances that would ensure its cultural survival and prosperity. You were not content to be queen. You became a skilled negotiator, a strategist who played chess with kings and kingdoms. That promise to keep the Breton identity alive was not an empty phrase. You used it as a tool to protect Breton culture and language at the French court. Imagine. Despite being Queen of France, you made sure that Breton, your mother tongue, was heard in the corridors of the palace, subtly but firmly. The Breton presence was felt, not only in the person of the Queen, but also in the details. You commissioned works of art, music, and literature that reflected Breton culture. This was not an imposition, but an elegant and strategic integration. Your artistic patronages, though made at the French court, kept the Breton spirit and pride alive, reminding everyone, including Louis, of where you came from and what you stood for. Your actions were not just symbolic gestures. The administration of Brittany, even under the French crown, was maintained, in part, thanks to your efforts. Recall that you managed to maintain the administration of Brittany and its legal system. Although not as an independent kingdom, the Breton identity remained, to a large extent, thanks to your political intelligence. Imagine the French court, a hotbed of intrigues, alliances, and betrayals. You, and a young Breton queen in a sea of powerful enemies, had to navigate those troubled waters with cunning and courage. Your marriage to Charles VIII, though forced, provided you with a seat at the game of power, a game you quickly learned to master. You were not just a queen, you were a key player on the political chessboard of Europe. You learned to use your charm, your intelligence, and, above all, your determination to achieve your goals. You surrounded yourself with loyal advisors, both Breton and French, creating a network of support that allowed you to obtain information and maneuver within the court effectively. You were not intimidated by the great feudal lords, nor by the French nobility itself, who regarded you with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. You not only survived in that complex court, you thrived. You managed to influence political decisions, protect the interests of Brittany, and, most importantly, secure your position as a key figure in 16th century France. Your ability to weave strategic alliances and to manipulate situations to your advantage made you a respected, feared, and, above all, powerful queen. You were not just a victim of circumstance. You were a protagonist of your own history. Despite her youth, and became a key player in the complex French political machinery. You could see how she participated in discussions about strategic alliances, offering her insight and knowledge of the European nobility. Her influence was not only a product of her position as queen, but of her keen intelligence and her ability to read people. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Note how her opinion was sought in matters of state, including military matters. Her knowledge of Britain, her experience with court intrigues, and her negotiating skills made her an invaluable advisor to the kings she married. She was not just a figurehead. She was a real political force. Think of the pressure she was under. Maintaining the delicate peace between France and Brittany, defending the interests of her homeland in a foreign court, and at the same time securing her own position and that of her family. She played a dangerous game, but she played it masterfully, using her influence to win concessions and protect her people. But her influence went beyond politics. You will see how Anne, despite the difficulties, became a patron of the arts. Her court was filled with artists and writers, becoming a center of cultural innovation. Imagine the splendor of the illuminated manuscripts she commissioned, true masterpieces that reflected the sophistication of her taste and the talent of the artists around her. She not only protected them, she inspired them. Her support for architecture was also significant. You might observe how the buildings of her time were enriched by her patronage. Think of the castles, the churches, the palaces, each of them, testimony to the splendor of her reign and her artistic vision. He did not limit himself to financing works, but actively participated in their design and execution, leaving an indelible mark on French aesthetics. But his patronage was not limited to architecture and manuscript illumination. Notice how he also promoted the music and literature of his time. Her court hosted renowned musicians and composers, and she herself is believed to have been a great lover of music. It is said that unique and sophisticated musical pieces were performed at her parties and events, reflecting the Queen's refined taste. A true cultural renaissance flourished under her protection. But her influence was not limited to the court salons. You will see how Anne, deeply religious, became a key figure within the church. Her devotion to the Catholic faith was sincere and public, and she reflected it in her daily actions and political decisions. She was not just a queen, but a woman of faith who sought spiritual guidance amidst the storms of political life. She founded monasteries and hospitals, promoted the construction of churches, and donated generously to charitable works. Her faith was not a mere ornament, but an engine that drove her actions and gave her strength in times of adversity. For her, religion was something deeply personal, but also a tool to build alliances and consolidate her power. Her role in the church was not limited to charity. She acted as a mediator in religious disputes, using her influence to promote peace and reconciliation between different factions. Her deep faith and keen political intelligence made her a respected figure, even by those who did not share her faith. Remember that her influence transcended the purely political. Her spirituality shaped her reign. Her religious devotion, far from being a mere facade, became a powerful tool, and used her faith to connect with the French people, displaying a genuine piety that made her accessible and approachable. She organized charitable works, financed the construction of churches and hospitals, and surrounded herself with influential ecclesiastical advisors. This image of a pious and generous queen catapulted her to popular admiration, contrasting with the image of a conqueror that many associated with Charles VIII. But Anne did not limit herself to charity. She promoted the arts and letters at the French court, becoming a patron of artists and writers. She commissioned magnificent works of art, enriched the royal libraries, and promoted cultural development. Her patronage not only enhanced her image as a cultured and refined queen, but also strengthened her position of power, attracting the intellectual and artistic elite into her orbit. Finally, her political skill was key, and learned to skillfully navigate the intricate French court, weaving strategic alliances and winning the loyalty of powerful nobles. Her intelligence and political astuteness were evident in her ability to resolve conflicts and maintain the stability of the kingdom. This image of a wise and skillful queen completed the portrait of a figure respected and admired by all, even by those who initially saw her as a simple conquered princess. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. But her influence transcended mere devotion. and demonstrated an astonishing ability for administration. While dealing with the intrigues of the French court, she also oversaw the management of her own domains, demonstrating an efficiency uncommon for a queen of her time. She became directly involved in tax collection, justice, and land administration, ensuring a steady flow of resources for the crown and for Brittany. Her pragmatism was admirable. He did not merely sign documents. He understood the complexities of economics and administration. He imposed fiscal reforms that, although unpopular in some circles, proved crucial to stabilizing the French economy after the wars. He implemented new strategies to optimize tax collection, reducing corruption and increasing real revenues. In addition to the economy, Anne was concerned with justice. She pushed for legal reforms to improve the administration of justice in her domains, seeking fairness and impartiality. Her direct intervention in cases of injustice made her a respected figure, not only by the nobility, but also by the common people. Her efficient and fair management contrasted with the corruption that often plagued the court. But governing was not easy. Imagine the constant pressure. Powerful nobles conspiring behind your back, the French court full of intrigue, and the need to maintain a balance between your Breton background and your new responsibilities as queen. You had to navigate a sea of political alliances, each decision with far-reaching consequences for Brittany and France. The French court was an arena where survival depended on cunning and diplomacy. Every word, every gesture was analyzed, interpreted, and used by your rivals. You, however, moved with a grace and intelligence that allowed you not only to survive, but to thrive in this hostile environment. You had to maintain your Breton identity, a constant challenge at the French court. It was a subtle but crucial struggle for you. Your culture, your roots were an essential part of your strength. It was a delicate balance between loyalty to your new kingdom and the memory of your homeland. The pressure to produce an heir, the constant intrigue of the court, the wars and political negotiations. All this was part of your daily reality. And you, with your inner strength, faced it all with a determination that commanded respect. But what was life like for a woman at the French court in the 15th century? For you will imagine a world of rigid social norms, where a woman's influence depended to a large extent on her proximity to the king. However, Anne, with her intelligence and cunning, managed to navigate these troubled waters. Her Breton origin, although initially a disadvantage, became a tool, as it allowed her to play with political alliances and negotiate her own power. She understood that her position was not just a matter of titles, but of real influence. Through her artistic and literary patronage, and promoted Breton culture within the French court, leaving an indelible mark on the art and literature of the time. She was not only limited to being a decorative figure, but became an active patron, ensuring that her cultural heritage was not forgotten. Beyond the arts, and became actively involved in politics, using her influence to protect the interests of Britain and her subjects. Although she was unable to prevent the complete assimilation of her duchy into France, her constant negotiation and ability to weave strategic alliances allowed her to secure more favorable treatment for her people. Remember that her marriage to Louis XII, for example, was the result of careful strategy. Imagine the pressure on Anne. Married to Charles VIII, a young king with no direct heirs, her position became crucial for the stability of France. The succession to the throne was a delicate issue, a power game where every move could trigger a war. You may ask, what role did Anne play in this complex chessboard? Well, much more than you might imagine. Her marriage, although forced, gave her access to royal power. Despite her Breton origins and the loss of her duchy, Anne knew how to navigate the intricate waters of the French court. Her political savvy allowed her to consolidate her position and, more importantly, to influence the royal succession, ensuring, to some extent, the peace and stability of the kingdom. After the death of Charles VIII, her marriage to Louis XII, although also a political arrangement, was much more favorable to Brittany. Anne negotiated shrewdly, securing certain privileges for her homeland. Her influence in the succession and in the French government was key to maintaining relative peace and avoiding conflicts that could have further destabilized the kingdom. She herself became a key element in the stability of the French throne. /prosody, /speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Think of the young and surrounded by political turbulence, but with an agile and curious mind. Despite the chaos that surrounded her, her education was exceptional. She received training in the humanities, a privilege for women of the time. She mastered Latin, French, and Breton, languages that would serve as tools of power in her rise. Not only did she learn to read and write, but she developed a keen strategic intelligence. His training was not limited to books. He learned the arts of diplomacy and negotiation, crucial skills for navigating the complex world of the French court. He developed an exceptional ability to analyze political situations, understand the motivations of others, and use his intelligence to his own and Britain's advantage. Beyond politics, and cultivated an interest in the arts and culture. Her patronage of artists and writers contributed to the burgeoning French cultural scene. This facet of her personality, combined with her political savvy, made her a respected and admired figure, even by those who initially saw her as a mere political pawn. Imagine the constant pressure on and being queen was not just a title, it was a daily battle. Anne's health, despite her privileged upbringing, was affected by the stress. The weight of the crown, palace intrigues, and the constant threat of war wore her down physically and emotionally. You, as a viewer, can feel the burden this young woman endured in such a complex world. Repeated pregnancies, a crucial aspect of a queen's life at the time, also took their toll. Each childbirth was a test of endurance, a risk to her life and health. Think of the physical pain, exhaustion, and vulnerability it entailed. For Anne, every pregnancy was a gamble, not only for the succession, but for her own survival. But Anna's health was not limited to the physical. The emotional impact of her life, marked by exile, the loss of her independence, and forced marriage, had profound consequences. The constant political tension, betrayals, and power struggles affected her deeply, leaving a mark on her mental well-being. You can imagine the loneliness she felt despite being surrounded by courtiers. Remember that, despite her new life at the French court, Anne never forgot her family. The loss of her independence and the tearing away of her home in Brittany marked her deeply. Her letters, though sparse because of the restrictions of the time, reveal a deep sadness at the separation from her loved ones and a constant concern for their welfare. Despite palace intrigues, she always sought to maintain contact with them, even if only through intermediaries. Her relationship with her brother, the Duke of Brittany, although complicated by the political situation, was always important. He represented the tangible link to her past, to her identity, to the land she had lost, and fought tirelessly to protect her interests, even if at times she had to navigate treacherous waters at the French court. She knew that her own power and influence were, in part, the only hope her family had left. Anne's influence also extended to her more distant relatives. Although her power could not restore them to their lands or their former position, it could protect them from persecution and ensure them a certain level of well-being. Through her network of contacts, and using her ingenuity and determination, Anne created a protective shield for those who, like herself, had suffered the consequences of the French conquest. This protection, although subtle, was a silent testimony of her loyalty to her family and her homeland. But her rise was not without its dangers. At the French court, full of intrigues and rivalries, and had many enemies, French nobles resentful of the growing influence of a Breton queen, and members of the royal family who saw in her a threat to their own ambitions, were constantly plotting against her. Remember that the loss of Brittany still resonated, and many sought to take advantage of her vulnerability. Malicious rumors were spun. False accusations spread like wildfire, attempting to tarnish her reputation and weaken her position. Some claimed she was a spy in the service of England, others that she was plotting to take back Britain by force. The pressure was immense, and every day was a struggle to maintain control and stability. You yourself can imagine the constant tension, the need to navigate treacherous waters, where every word, every gesture, could be interpreted as a threat or a sign of weakness, and had to deploy all her intelligence and cunning to survive these conspiracies. Her ability to weave alliances, to win the loyalty of some and neutralize others, was fundamental to her survival. prosody, speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But her skill was not limited to politics. You see, and demonstrated an exceptional talent for the financial management of the kingdom. After years of war and conflict, France needed to rebuild, and Anne, with a sharp and strategic mind, set about the task of cleaning up the royal finances. She implemented new fiscal policies, revised taxes, and sought to optimize state revenues. Her goal was clear: to strengthen the French economy and, at the same time, improve the lives of her subjects. His approach was not only to raise more money, but to do so fairly and efficiently. He pushed for reforms in tax collection, reducing the corruption and oppression suffered by many peasants. He understood that a prosperous economy depended on the prosperity of the entire population, not just the nobility. This innovative vision for the time made her a queen admired not only for her political power, but also for her concern for the welfare of her people. In addition to fiscal reforms, and focused on long-term economic development, she promoted trade, encouraging the construction of new trade routes and the opening of ports. Her interest in economic development was not limited to France. She also boosted the economy of Brittany, her homeland, seeking a balance between integration with France and maintaining the identity and prosperity of her duchy. This strategy allowed him to strengthen his position both at the French court and in Brittany. You see, and far from being a mere puppet queen, wove an intricate web of international alliances. Her skill at diplomacy was astounding. She took advantage of her position to negotiate treaties and pacts that benefited Brittany, though already united with France, thus ensuring the prosperity of her homeland, even within the French kingdom. Remember that he always kept a strategic eye on the future of his people. Her marriage to Charles VIII, although forced, opened doors to international politics. Through letters and emissaries, she maintained constant contact with other European monarchs, seeking support and forging strategic alliances that strengthened her position and protected Brittany's interests. It was a masterful move, and you can appreciate his political savvy. Later, her second marriage to Louis XII, although also political, allowed her to negotiate much more favorable terms for Brittany. She managed to maintain certain prerogatives and autonomy for her duchy, ensuring its identity and culture. She did not limit herself to being a mere figurehead, but used her influence to preserve the legacy of her land. But what was and like in private? The chronicles describe her as an intelligent, determined woman with great personal charm. Imagine her penetrating gaze, capable of analyzing anyone with a single glance. She was not a submissive woman, but a person who knew what she wanted and fought to get it, even in her private life. Her marriage to Charles VIII, though forced, did not define her. She was much more than a simple victim. Her relationship with Charles VIII was, according to most historians, cold and politically strategic. There is no evidence of great love, but there is evidence of mutual respect and an understanding of their roles within complex French politics. However, her second marriage to Louis XII was different. The sources suggest a greater closeness, a warmer relationship based on a friendship that developed into affection. Beyond her marriages, Anne's personal life remains partly shrouded in mystery. Although no explicit details about her feelings or preferences are known, her determination and ability to navigate the complexities of the French court suggest a woman of great inner strength. A woman who, despite adverse circumstances, knew how to protect her identity and her own will. But her influence was not limited to politics, and, as a good queen, left an indelible mark on French architecture. Think of the impressive castles, the majestic churches, and the improvements in the cities that were made during her reign. She not only oversaw the works, but often pushed them forward, ensuring that the best materials and the most skilled craftsmen were used. In Amboise, for example, major improvements were made to the royal castle, turning it into a center of power and culture. Imagine the elegance of its halls, the beauty of its gardens, and the solidity of its walls. All of this, a reflection of Anne's power and good taste. Her passion for architecture was not limited to royal palaces, and also encouraged the construction and repair of churches and monasteries throughout the kingdom. She believed in the power of faith and the importance of spiritual beauty, which is reflected in the donations and patronage she gave to these institutions. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. So, the next time you see a majestic building of the period, remember Anne of Brittany. Her architectural legacy is tangible proof of her power, her vision and her lasting impact on 16th century France. She was not only an intelligent and determined queen, but also a patron of art and architecture, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. But Anne's influence went beyond palaces and churches. You will see how she was concerned with justice and fairness, something unusual for the time. Imagine a queen who not only cared about the beauty of her kingdom, but also about the justice of her laws, and focused on reforming the judicial system, seeking fairness and equity for all her subjects, regardless of their social position. She strove to reduce the corruption and arbitrariness that plagued the courts. To this end, he implemented new measures to ensure that trials were fair and sentences were applied impartially. Think of how many lives were positively affected by his reforms. We are talking about a time when justice was a luxury, and Anna made it accessible to more people. Her legacy in this area is less well known, but just as important. She was not only dedicated to great architectural works, but also worked to improve the daily lives of her subjects, seeking a more accessible and equitable justice. Imagine the impact of her reforms on the lives of ordinary people, who finally saw their cases treated more fairly. You see, and knew how to use the image to her advantage. After the conquest of Brittany, French propaganda presented her as a submissive queen, a figurehead. But she cleverly began to build a contrary image. She surrounded herself with artists and writers who portrayed her as a cultured, devout, and just sovereign. Observe how her public image changed subtly, moving away from the image of victim initially imposed. Think of the portraits that were made of her. Not only do they show her with the beauty befitting a queen, but they also convey a sense of inner strength, a determination that contradicted the official narrative of a defeated monarch. These portraits, carefully disseminated, became propaganda tools, showing a powerful and capable of influencing French politics. Her influence extended beyond the visual arts, and sponsored literary works that presented her as a key figure in French history, not just a conquered princess. Through these acts, she reinforced her position and the legitimacy of her reign, projecting an image of a queen who not only survived, but thrived, even in the face of adversity. Remember that the image you project is as important as your actions. You see, the integration of Brittany into France was not a peaceful process. Although Anne, with her cunning, managed to negotiate more favorable terms for her duchy in her second marriage, the reality was that Breton independence, as you knew it, had come to an end. Charles VIII had imposed his rule, and although Anne managed to mitigate some of the damage, the loss of Breton sovereignty was irreversible. French administration was gradually imposed on Brittany. New French laws, taxes and officials were introduced, slowly replacing Breton power structures. For the Breton population, this meant a profound and often painful change, a loss of identity and autonomy that was experienced in a very personal way. However, despite the loss of political independence, Breton culture persisted. The Breton language, although relegated, did not disappear completely. Breton traditions and customs lived on, often surviving in rural areas and in the collective memory of the people. And although Queen of France always maintained a link with her roots. You see, although Brittany lost its independence, the figure of and resonated for centuries. Her memory was kept alive, not only in the tales of the French court, but also in Breton legends. She is remembered as a woman who, despite adversity, fought for her people and managed, to some extent, to protect their interests. Her image became a symbol of resistance and cunning. Her influence extended beyond the simple historical narrative. Breton culture, despite integration into France, retained distinctive elements, a survival that, in part, is attributed to the image of a Breton queen who had conquered the hearts and minds of the French court. You can imagine how her legacy became intertwined with Breton identity itself. Even in Breton architecture and art, traces of her reign can be found. Some buildings and works of art carry an implicit memory of his influence, a subtle but persistent reminder of the mark he left on his homeland. Think of it as a kind of silent echo that endures through time. Prosody, speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. You see, and story is not just that of a defeated princess. She was a woman who, after the humiliation of conquest and the loss of her home, knew how to navigate the complexities of the French court. Imagine, a young woman forced to marry the man who had destroyed her world, yet she transformed that situation into a position of power. Her intelligence was her best weapon. She quickly learned the rules of the political game, weaving alliances and using her charm to gain influence. She did not allow herself to be intimidated by the men around her. On the contrary, she became a key player in the political decisions of France. Most impressively, despite her marriage to the King of France, she never forgot her homeland. She used her position to protect the interests of Brittany, shrewdly negotiating and securing benefits for her duchy. She was not just a French queen, she was the Breton queen in France. Her story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit, to the ability to overcome adversity and to turn a situation of vulnerability into a position of real power. And of Brittany not only survived, but triumphed, leaving a legacy that endures to this day. But how did Anne of Brittany really die? Her death at age 36 in 1514 remains shrouded in mystery. Some point to an illness, perhaps tuberculosis, a common ailment at the time. Others, however, whisper of palace intrigues, poisons and conspiracies. The rapidity with which his health declined fuels these theories, leaving room for speculation. The absence of a clear diagnosis in the historical records only fans the flames of debate. Was it a natural illness? Or was a dark hand hovering over the queen, seeking her end? Think of the power Anne had amassed, the alliances she had woven and the enemies she had inevitably made in her rise to power. Her political rivals would not be the only suspects. Even her own family, the members of the House of Brittany who still clung to their rights, might have seen in her death an opportunity to regain their influence. Anne's death opened a power vacuum that would change the course of French history. But was it a vacuum caused by illness or by something more sinister? The truth, surely, was lost in the recesses of time, leaving us with only speculation and questions. His funeral was an event of great pomp, reflecting his importance to France. Imagine the funeral procession moving slowly through the streets of St. Denis, the royal abbey where the kings of France were laid to rest. Anne's richly decorated coffin was carried by nobles, while the sound of funeral chants echoed in the air. Thousands of people gathered to bid farewell to the queen, a testament to her popularity and the mark she left on the country. Inside the abbey, the ceremony was solemn and moving. Think of the echoing Latin prayers, the scent of incense and the candles that illuminated the faces of those in attendance, reflecting their emotions. Anne was buried with royal honors, a last gesture of respect for the woman who, despite adversities, became a fundamental pillar of the French monarchy. But her legacy transcended her physical death. Anne of Brittany not only left a mark on French politics, but also became a symbol of endurance and fortitude. Her image endures in the collective memory, reminding us of the story of a woman who, despite adverse circumstances, knew how to forge her own path. Her story is an example of resilience and a reminder of the lasting impact a single person can have on history. But who was really Anne of Brittany? Beyond the images of a powerful and cunning queen that history has bequeathed to us, what can we say with certainty? Many remember her as an almost mythical figure, a woman who defied the conventions of her time. However, the reality is that her life was marked by politics, alliances, and the constant pressures of a complex court full of intrigue. She was a key player on the European game board, and her decisions had far-reaching consequences for France and Britain. Analyzing his life involves separating legend from reality. There are numerous accounts and anecdotes that paint her as an exceptionally intelligent and politically adept woman, able to maneuver deftly among the powerful of her time. However, it is also true that her choices were often limited by her status as a woman and princess in a male-dominated world. Her marriage to Charles VIII, for example, was an act of imposed subjugation, but she knew how to turn it into an opportunity to protect the interests of Brittany. Prosody, speak. The speak prosody rate equals 90%. Her legacy is complex. Although she failed to prevent the complete integration of Brittany into France, her reign marked a period of relative stability and prosperity for the duchy. Her influence at the French court was undeniable, and her image as a cultured and pious queen endures to this day. Remember that her actions, though sometimes guided by the need for survival, left a profound mark on the history of France and Brittany. You can decide for yourself which part of the legend you want to believe. So what is Anne's legacy? You might think that, after losing Brittany's independence, her story would be just a footnote. But no. Her political savvy, her ability to navigate the complexities of the French court, made her an example of survival and, more to the point, triumph. Remember how I told you of her ability to weave alliances, to play the powers at play, always seeking the best outcome for her people, even within the constraints imposed. Her marriage to Louis XII, though arranged for convenience, brought concrete benefits for Brittany. I showed you how she achieved better conditions than those imposed by Charles VIII, protecting the interests of her duchy, even when integrated into the French monarchy. This is a perfect example of how, even in an adverse situation, she found a way to negotiate and fight for what she considered fair. Beyond politics, her patronage of the arts and letters left an indelible mark, and contributed significantly to the cultural flourishing of the era, leaving a legacy that transcends her reign. Think about it. Her figure, despite the centuries, continues to inspire admiration and study. She is a reminder that resilience and intelligence can overcome even the most difficult circumstances. In short, Anne of Brittany was much more than just a player in the power game of the time. She was a woman who, despite tragedy and humiliation, forged her own path, leaving a profound mark on history. Her story is a lesson in resilience, political astuteness, and the human capacity to overcome adversity. His legacy lives on, a testament to an extraordinary life. I hope you enjoyed learning about Anne of Brittany. Her story is amazing. If you liked it, hit like and subscribe for more fascinating stories. What did you think of her resilience? Prosody, speak.